Can everybody hear me now? Good thing we checked over on the chat there. I'm running dual monitors. Hello, everybody. You can't hear me. Shout out to now Nader. Shout out to Marty. Shout out to Steven. Everybody should be able to hear me now. Yes, everybody good. Someone give me a nice big thumbs up over there in the chat. If you're hearing me coming through, confirming. I think all my levels are right here. Let's go ahead and kick this thing right back off. Hey, that's live YouTube coverage. I like to do a nice dry run before I dive in. All right. Thank you, everybody. And shout out to Tuto as well, getting in on it. So the update was coming in, right? Well, reset myself. You guys didn't hear this. I heard it from my own head. Obviously, we were on earlier today. We knew coming out of that game against Cincinnati there were going to be concerns, injury updates. So Darian Beavers is the one that we were focusing on here to start, simply because as was highlighted by Jordan Renan, worst fears confirmed his rookie linebacker Beavers suffered the torn ACL in his left knee, was wearing a brace as he left the locker room. Obviously, it's a blow for the promising young rookie. Was piggybacked by Will Presti. Darian Beavers, one of my favorite draft picks outside of the first round. If you were with me on draft night coverage, you know that I was absolutely elated when the Giants were able to land Darian Beavers in the 6th round, because I thought he was worthy of sneaking back into the 4th round, maybe early 5th round, 100%. And then as he starts to fall, you drift your attention away from it and think about other areas that the Giants are going to address in the draft, and he's just not going to be there. And then you get him, and it feels like a steal, and we know how valuable he potentially was going to be for this team. And you saw it happening in the preseason here. The particular article that I happen to be following, shout out to Andy Makowitz, who's at the helm here, I think, on the social handle for the One Giant podcast. Terrible blow for Beavers and the Giants. Position already thin for Big Blue. We'll have to look to add some depth as they work their way, as other teams work their way through their cut downs, and see how that's going to stack up. Oh, yes, thank you very much, Nader, for coming in and out. That was me. Technical error on my end, my friends. So nothing to do with anybody but operator error, as we like to say. So this one really stings. We're going to talk about the depth chart piece of it. We started with the Darian Beavers, obviously news, because we also know, while not great, this is great news. Let's be realistic, right? And we actually showed this. I'll go ahead and run it one more time for you here if we still have the availability. You may have saw this one. Join in celebration if you can, as this is what we were willing to dedicate our lives to, if necessary, earlier today on the podcast. It's the can't stop, won't stop. Would have given it all up. And guess what? Kayvon Thibodeaux, obviously the higher profile, and certainly the guy that we anticipate immediate, big, massive impact, short-term, long-term, all around. 3 to 4 weeks after suffering the sprained MCL on that cut block to get into the backfield. Listen, we talked about it earlier about the turf and everything else. That's more Darian Beavers based. This one, it happened. The player goes low. I was surprised, and get it on the comments if you want. It felt like, it felt like this was a really big debate for social media around if this was a dirty play or not. Some people, including on the broadcast with Bob Papa and Harry Carson, they were saying, listen, you meet in the backfield. If you're a defensive player, you got to dip that knee, you got to dip that shoulder, got to get in there and lay the wood. Other people, Andy mentioned preseason. What are we talking about here? Not, why are you the agreement when you meet in the backfield and the play is going away from you? Hey, get our hands on one another, mix it up for a second. I think it's hard to say dial up full speed, break it down to neutral, right? Come back heavy. That isn't the way that the NFL game is played. So I didn't lean too much into it as far as where the media narrative was around this. Fairly divided. Former NFL players, guys, on one side saying dirty play, can't have it in the game. And then other ones saying, listen, it's football. It happens. It's terrible for Thibodeaux, but it does happen. That being the case, though, a shout out to Tuto. Thank you very much, my friend. This is a guy who's a frequent flyer. We know the deal, man. Absolutely love it. I hope that your journey professionally in sports is going better than it did on the field for Darian Beavers, certainly against Cincinnati, man. But here's the thing. the other part of this now, and this is the hard part about the NFL, because as soon as this happens, well, on the one hand, you feel terrible, and then immediately you start to think, well, what are the Giants now going to do? And there's a couple of fascinating possibilities that I thought were interesting here. We're going to come back in tomorrow. We're going to talk a lot about this game from Sunday, because there were other things that we didn't get a chance to discuss. The big hit by Fox, mentioned it in the closing of today's episode. Big blow up hit. That's more about Wink Martindale and what he's bringing to the table, the coaching factor that we want to talk a lot about here. But as we say, the injury piece with Darian Beavers out, you get Thibodeaux there. We had highlighted Gano, etc. But think about this roster right now. Like, think about the depth position here when you go inside the defensive unit. I mean, so now you have, let's just talk about in the next 3 to 4 weeks. Understand that's gonna bleed into the regular season, gonna come close to it, right? Um, and I wonder here, we'll take a little pause. Let's see what we got. You have to realize that these are younger players, that they may not know how to tackle properly and can cause damage more than trying to do a job. Yeah, no, listen, for sure. Just to touch briefly on the chop block there. This is a both and for me, right? Like, you have the unfortunateness, you have the unfortunate that it's an injury. You have the timing, the rhythm, young players trying to learn the game. They get out there. He instinctually, you know, doesn't necessarily think he's going to go down. There's that little split second where they look like they're going to meet, and then the player goes down for Cincinnati and goes to the knee. There's so many things happening so fast there. So there's a lot of factors. My point overall is just, I'm not going to lay it at the feet of that player anything beyond, not intentionally malicious or dirty. He's going in. He's trying to make the play. He goes low because Thibodeau's a big guy and he wants to get the block. He's trying to make the team all that good stuff, or bad stuff in this scenario. But just to talk about for a second here, the depth chart situation. So all of a sudden, and it's already happened depending on where you're looking here, but when you look at the linebackers, first of all, even Thibodeaux, so let's go with him first here, the edge rusher, 3 to 4 weeks. So that's right there on the cusp of that start of the regular season. Will he be ready? Will he be back at practice? And the timeline, because this is a rebuilding year for the New York Football Giants, for better or worse, you're not going to pressure him to come back immediately. So as this starts to fall into the season, now you're talking about O'Shane Ximenez. Does this increase the likelihood that, at least in the short term, Quincy Roche is closer to making this roster than further away? Probably true, right? At least just to fill in those reps. Fox, who we talked about there, making the big play to close out that game. Maybe he hangs around a little bit longer. And on the other side, across from Thibodeaux, we know that a guy like Ryder Anderson has seemingly been making a bigger push potentially to make this roster. Have to see how things shake out over these next couple of days. But, you've got, for crying out loud, I know it's in the defensive end room, but Jihad Ward, Ellerson Smith, questionable injuries, right? So 1, 2, go on the other side now. Going to go 3, 4. I'm working through the defense here. So many different players with different levels of injury concerns. Calitro has been fun to watch. Is he going to stick around on this roster now, or are you going to go to free agency? Are you going to watch for the potential cut candidates around the league, as Andy mentioned over on Twitter, to fill this thing out? It's a brutal beat, obviously, for in the short term Thibodeaux, but he'll be all right. We think he'll get back. Beavers, then, this is where I think it is interesting, because you have Blake Martinez and Tay Crowder as your starters there. As it stands right now, Beavers takes a step back, and Cam Brown theoretically could take a step up here. Carter Coughlin, who played on the outside, got moved to the inside last year. I think he's a little bit smaller. I like him better on the interior, so maybe he starts to rotate in there to that mix a little bit. But that's the room, guys. Including Carter Coughlin in that mix. Blake Martinez, Tay Crowder, Micah McFadden, Cam Brown, Darian Beavers gone. So you got to add some players in here at some point. And that's what I think is going to be interesting to see how the Giants go about addressing it. We talked about yesterday, a couple of days ago, how they had signed Chris Owens back. Revis came back. Signed Owens, brought in Revis, waived Christopher Hinton. Robert Foster went to injured reserve. That paved the way for Keelan Doss to remain on this roster. But now, is Keelan Doss, again, another second away from being off of this roster, especially after you see the way Obviously, we know Colin Johnson been playing well. But you add David Sills has a good game. Obviously, Alex Bachman has an absolutely sensational game, at least in the short term. You got the bodies that you can keep in camp. Do you now look at moving off of one of these other promising players or guys you at least want to keep around in the short term in order to fill that void? Ah, good. I'm putting up Marty saluting Tuto. Salute, 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 salutes all around, right? I think it's good. It's good to build up that kind of camaraderie. So this is, listen, the short term is it's terrible for Darian Beavers. You dodge the bullet for Kayvon Thibodeaux, but the other factor is now go high level, because when we talk about the injuries overall, we already know. I think Graham Gano, you're not worried about. We'll see what happens with the ribs for CJ Board. Azudu already had the problems there with his issues. You lost there to injured reserve Robert Foster. We mentioned Sterling Shepard trying to make his way back. The laundry list of guys that coming into this year, and even questionable players like a Matt Breida, like a Kadarius Toney, high profile, like a Darius Slayton, whether he's on this team or not. Ricky Seals-Jones, we thought was going to be the veteran on this roster, yet can't be on the field enough, let alone specifically at the linebacker position, and Blake Martinez trying to work his way back from injury. I don't know how we don't start to move the goalpost a little bit on expectations for this season, when especially when you see the younger players having some injury concerns, and start to say, boy, those first 6 to 7 weeks are going to become very veteran evaluation showcase territory for the Giants to try to maximize the value going into next year's draft class. We'll say I definitely keep Quincy Roche. Yeah, 100%. I think him and obviously Oshane Ximines are going to be guys you want to keep around. I mentioned him because you go look at Dan Dugan when he had talked about his, all too early a few days ago projection for the 53-man roster. Roche was on the outside looking in. We like him, but it seemed like you certainly got this push from Oshane Ximines underneath Wink Martindale and a new coaching staff. It just looked like Oshane Ximines was reemerging as a guy that in the short term, like he falls into the Julian Love category. Boy, whether or not you think these guys are a part of the team in the big picture, the grand scheme of things, maybe, maybe not. However, they can certainly be guys that can contribute. And like that turns for me a little bit here. You need the bodies, you need the players in there. But if you thought, well, Quincy Roche needs a little more development, a little more seasoning. If we can sneak him in and keep him around, great. But Oshane Ximines is ready to contribute. Now Darian Beavers goes down. Short-term injury concerns for Kayvon Thibodeaux. Does it start to say, weeks 1, 2, 3, 4? At what point will the record reflect we got to maximize Oshane Ximines' value on the market because he's not going to have the same value we had hoped he could coming into the season because of other injuries? It no longer matters to be willing to sacrifice getting pick X for Oshane Ximines when you want to make sure the team was going to be deep, the team was going to be dynamic, the team was going to be trying to win games. I don't know how far we are away from that. I'm not saying it with any level of certainty. I'm merely just, come on. We're sitting here looking at some of the key pieces fall away here a little bit. Yeah, you're right, Nader. And to be fair, he has looked good, Oshane Ximines. So now all of a sudden, you kind of, we're all doing this mental gymnastics, right? On the one hand, Oshane Ximines, he's a cut candidate coming out of last season. Then you get here and you go, well, he's reemerging underneath the new staff. You at least keep him around short term. And then I think you even go the step further. Julian Love is the example for our podcast, where we thought that things were far further than closer from him being a part of this roster. And now again, we've seen this, saw the comments on today's show. Coaching, as we've said, but coaching matters. But now you're seeing the results of this coaching staff getting their hands on guys that maybe higher football IQ, now being better utilized in a system that really has a direction and a sense of operation to it. And then two, a coaching staff that looks at a player, identifies skill set, and says, I can maximize what you are based on what you can come to the table with. And that includes a guy like Oshane Ximines, 100%. Another one here, by the way, we are an all-pro rugby players here. And the first lesson we learned is to get smart, how to hit hard by not getting injured. And also, don't allow any sneaky tackles. Yeah, man, 100%, 100%, Tuto. Like, it's not this conversation about injuries and what's gone on. It's not just about that the injury happened. I think the pullback is proper play, proper technique, proper execution, and make sure that you can go out and develop and get better without risking, by the way, yourself included in that scenario. In the instance of Tibbs, it ends up going that way. What do we got here from Nader? I like the fact that the coaching is getting the best out of their players, even though they were not picked. Yeah, and that's well, and we talked about this. What maybe a week or two ago, I tongue in cheek with Annie said, Where do we get to here?" Like the green screen just drifting into the mist here. At what point do we go? Well, the picks themselves under the GMs whose name we shall not mention, they weren't as bad so much as the coaching staff that was in place was the problem in developing that talent, right? Because you can go and look through this roster right now, and there was never a question around the talent that is Saquon Barkley. But you can go through and say, Kadarius Toney in and out of the play there, but early on his development when he stepped onto the field, why wasn't he up to speed and ready to go sooner? Um, Andrew Thomas started to turn that corner, but you feel like we're even more bullish on him. Azeez Ojulari looked good coming out. I think a guy like Dexter Lawrence is a guy that I'm watching now. What was wasted in his talent underneath previous coaching staffs, potentially. Carter Coughlin, who may have a bigger role for himself here. I was high on him as a back end draft pick when he came out. Maybe that's been the detriment of him. Cam Brown, who we've heard talked about in these preseason games, where they say, hey, listen, he has been an elite special teams contributor. You saw him make the great play when Graham Gano was kicked in the head. It was Cam Brown who got all the way back across field to stop that one from maybe going to the house potentially. How much of the young players get damaged by a lack of direction, a lack of real coaching knowledge, and in some cases, in the carryover from year to year, the uncertainty of, well, my role was X. My hands in the dirt. Now I'm standing up. I'm asked to be in coverage. I'm asked to go after, right? All of those things play a big factor as well. And I specifically, intentionally, as I just wanted to flesh it out, Julian Love would go into that list. Obviously, a guy like Tay Crowder, who's been playing and is, looked good, consistent, maybe not starting caliber, but where is his ceiling go underneath this new staff? Obviously, to go along with a lot of the other young players that are holdovers from the previous regime. Darnay Holmes would be one of them. Now, he already was flashing it, but boy, does he look like he's gone to the next level. That can be coinciding with under Wink Martindale and emerging at the right time of his career. I specifically glossed over Daniel Jones. No one is going to suffer more at the hands of bad coaching, inconsistent coaching, bad systems, changing systems than an NFL quarterback. And the GM's name, who not be mentioned, it is fascinating to look back and say, boy, the signings like Kenny Golladay are going to be as bad on his ledger as anything else, but the talent could actually look a lot better from a draft standpoint as we move through this season and then into next season. Even a guy like Gary Brightwell, questionable, didn't play in preseason game number 2, but he's a guy you didn't hear sniff one from. And then all of a sudden he shows up this year. Obviously some improved play, by the way, from the offensive line, but he looks like a totally different player. Consistency and reliability is what we talk about. We want from players. You want it from the coaching staff too. So these are some of the little things I think we can look at and say, where are we improving as a team, as an organization? Stability, reliability, consistency, and you win nothing in preseason games, but you can certainly change the narrative around what your staff is and where you think you can go. Fire it up here. Even gonna pull myself up over top of this one. Thank you so much to Tudo. Shout out for the gold standard, getting it up there. 3 years ago, they were among the worst. And until we got better coaches and former U.S. Navy SEALs, hey, that never hurts, drill instructors for strength and discipline. Last season, we made, as I know you told us before in the comments, made it to the Super Rugby League quarterfinals. Yeah, man. I mean, listen, from Tuto's direct professional experience into, I mean, by the way, look around the league. Look around the league when we talk about this stuff. It's not This isn't some like groundbreaking information. The Patriots are, it's not because they always have the best players in the league. It's because Brian Belichick knows how to get the most out of them, right? He knows how to maximize the talent level. And then you think about other coaching staffs. Listen, Andy Reid, he goes from the Philadelphia Eagles. The ceiling is going to come for a team. You're going to reach a threshold where all the coaching in the world can't get you over the top of the talent. And sometimes there's shortcomings from a coaching staff too. But he goes out to Kansas City. Hey, he's got one of the best in the game, right? So there's no reason to look beyond the quarterback position, but look how his system gets into place and how it can be effective and how you can bring back guys like Spagnuolo, once upon a time a Giants coach, and have them bring in some of their influences and their impact. Look down at Baltimore and Harbaugh, right? They can rotate through and still be consistent on a year-to-year basis. That's the difference of average teams, bad teams versus good teams, consistent teams, playoff teams, championship teams. It's all in the details. So I really feel like, as we cover the gamut here, even with these injuries, I'm far more optimistic around how they can replace and continue to still be competitive this season with Brian Dable, Mike Kafka, and Wink Martindale on this coaching staff, and Joe Shane, by the way, in the GM position to go out and acquire that talent, as opposed to a year ago when, again, I don't really have any problems with Patrick Graham, but I got no expectations around what Jason Garrett is going to do offensively. If you start to say, watch out, this receiver is out with an injury, this offensive lineman goes down, I don't know what's going to happen then. I don't know what Joe Judge was going to be capable of. And again, I kind of put Patrick Graham off to the side, though that's a really good example because I think these guys all exist in the spectrum where Patrick Graham looked really good when a lot of the pieces were in place and working. And then as some things shifted and changed, or as James Bradbury came back to the pack a little bit, Patrick Graham that was it, right? I have my system, and when it works, it works. And if it doesn't, it's going to be hard for me to pivot, to find the new gear, to move on to a different attack. I think that Wink Martindale is far more capable of showing that versatility based on talent, based on skill sets. And we hope that that's going to be the case. Let's go. We'll go ahead and just drop in these other ones here. Yes. Yeah, of course, man. Listen, we can talk about if we want to go on the pro for 8 years in New Jersey, and I coach. There you go, sir. Well, Nader, shoot, hats off to you, sir. Genuinely, it's an accomplishment both as a player and then from the semi-pro level, and then also being able to coach the game and having that coaching perspective on a lot of this. You mentioned Bachman. We can, of course, just put the positive vibes out there that there were a lot of good takeaways, and I was only copping in here, just doing a quick live, updating those injuries, and then we think the transaction should come soon. McCathan was the other player that I didn't mention going to IR and joining Darian Beavers as rookies who will miss this entire season. To say nothing of what's happening with Matt Pert, Nick Gates, a lot of other guys, right? When you look over their roster right now, you can list more offensive linemen are questionable or injured than are not. But Bachman did look really good. And we talked about it on today's episode about how much stock do you put in what Bachman does with Davis Webb against third or fourth stringers or guys that aren't even going to play in the league for the Cincinnati Bengals. You take the consistency, the route running, the sure-handedness, the familiarity. Bachman, as we mentioned earlier today, talk with Cole Beasley, who has familiarity with the Daboll system, expectations for a player of his skill set. We'll see. We'll see. Andy talked about it where if it's going to be Kenny Golladay, Kadarius Toney, Wan'Dale Robinson, well, that's 3. Sterling Shepard maybe is going to make it back here, fingers crossed. Is Darius Slayton going to start with the team or not? We don't know. That's 5. Colin Johnson would make 6. And then you're into Richie James. He looks like he's shown up for them so far. You'd think that he's in there. And then you get into the CJ Boards, the Alex Bachmans, the Keelan Dosses, the David Sills. But, 6, 7, how deep can you go here? I think a big X factor is what happens with Darius Slayton, and then also what happens with Sterling Shepard. If Sterling Shepard starts the season on the PUP list, now all of a sudden you can keep another guy around for the first 4 weeks at least. And then when it comes to Darius Slayton, is there maybe an opportunity? I don't know if he was injured, fake, a little bit of fakery there just to keep him out of harm's way. He put on some good tape in preseason game number 1. Is any team calling for him? How low of an offer would the Giants take to clear off that $2.5 million? Joe was in over his head. Of course, yeah, listen, we can talk about that all the time, right? He didn't want to do it and how you, yeah, of course. And that, by the way, that's a big part of it, right? When you're a coach and you don't know what you need to do, players pick up on that, right? Players get frustrated by that and players check out on that. So, all that to say, we're going to come back in tomorrow. We're going to look back at this Bengals game, redigest some of the other positives, talk about some other positions, other players that look good, get back into. There was an Art Stapleton comment over on Twitter. You can convince him and you can convince us on this podcast, like we said, that if Antonio Williams is running back number 2, is Corbin in the conversation to be RB3? If Gary Brightwell is having to deal with injuries, if Matt Breida can't show that he can be healthy enough, there's a shuffling there, and everyone is looking they can be contributors. How much youth are they willing to go with at the running back position, the wide receiver room? Obviously, some of the other opportunities here when we take a look at the defensive side of the ball, and then getting into. I went over, man. I'll tell you right now. Like we didn't get into this here. Top 100 available free agents right now. Just going, this order is being provided by NFLTR. And listen, hey, Odell Beckham's at the top, so there you go. But when we talk about just linebackers, edge rushers, right? You got Trey Flowers second there on the list, but not sure how that's going to pan out for from a buying standpoint. As you work your way a little bit further down, though, the next linebacker, listen, Alexander Johnson, formerly from Denver. You had Hightower, formerly for New England. What else we got here? Edge rusher, McKinley, who played for Cleveland, 26 years old. I think that's formerly of Atlanta. We talked about him last year. Just can't seem to get his act together. He's a hard guy to think you're going to get into this roster. Jordan Jenkins, edge rusher as well. There's not a lot of guys there right now. Anthony Hitchens, excuse me. Kansas City. I just thought, hey, maybe there's something there, connection with Kafka, some familiarity. The stats don't bear it out. I mean, he's been a contributor, 30 years old. Bottom line, though, a lot of age, not a lot of optimism around guys you're just going to go out and pick up. Malcolm Smith, 33 years old. Like these guys, it's not going to happen for us here, right? Get the Super One in there. Has a decent roster with talented prospects. All they need is schemes with competent coaches and trainers to put it all together. Yeah, man, I think so. I really do. I genuinely think that yes, that is possible. Oh, you know why this is? Let me do a quick little adjust here. This is why that's so high up in the air. I got the scroll going down at the bottom. Good Lord, lies, my friends. Yeah. Do I think it's possible? Yes. I. Everyone is going to be better because of the coaching staff. Everything is going to look better than it has in the past. It's just hard right now with these injuries that are stacking up to think that there's an automatic answer here. Interestingly enough, I just came across here. Hold on one second here. A guy that maybe the Giants bring back in here. Free agent Jalen Smith, who they took a flyer on off the Cowboys last year, thought showed a little bit of something. Maybe there's an option there. He might be a guy to bring back in. Obviously, the organization has a little bit of familiarity with him. At least, listen, bring him in for the reps. What's the worst case scenario? It doesn't work out. He can't get it done. Someone else gets cut. You take him off and you bring in a veteran from somewhere else. Fine. But maybe that's one that we'll break down tomorrow, along with Andy, as we talk about where do the Giants go from here. I'll tell you one thing where they're going to go is straight to the deepest part of the depth chart when they get to preseason game number 3. I think they played with house money with Daniel Jones, getting some nice reps for him. And I think you had to do it. There's nothing you can do. You got to get the reps. Injuries are a part of the game. And also, as soon as you think you've seen enough from player X, get him out of there. And I don't think that Daniel Jones, at this point of his career, with all the questions that do surround him, he's not a guy that you put on the shelf and wrap up in bubble wrap and don't worry about. But a guy like Andrew Thomas maybe is in the final preseason game, right? A guy like they're doing with Kadarius Toney right now, an electric talent. Yeah, we're going to nurse every little bit that we can when it comes to these players and mitigating the risk potentially. Um, There you go. A little shout out there. That's a little bit more personal. You guys exchange that personal conversation down below. But yeah, so listen, there's going to be options. I'm always going to err on the side of younger guys that maybe have some upside, some untapped potential, and then you lean into coaching, you lean into schemes. We're going to break this all down tomorrow for you guys. Thank you very much. On a couple of levels. Shout out to Tudo. Always, man, you always come in. You're always great. Shout out to Nader as well. Everybody that came in had the live conversation, had a good discussion, updated some news and notes around this team. We understand that as the transactions go, we'll continue to update you on those. We'll come in tomorrow and break this game down a bit more. But we're in it, man. We're in the end game now, as one famous Marvel hero once said. This is it. We're narrowing in on the start of the season, and we're gonna get a real sense of where this team truly is. Because the one thing we haven't seen, and you've heard it on both sides of the ball, neither side has shown you really anything in 2 preseason games from a what are we going to be, right? You know what they're going to be if you can get it, you take it. Daniel Jones, the check downs, right? That little back shoulder fade to Sills, like that was like, oh, okay, there's a little taste about what they may want to do, but everything else is what are you doing around the line of scrimmage? Everything else is about repetition and getting a rhythm, right? And navigating these waters. Practice is where you're getting a bigger sample size about what they could potentially do. And as Andy talked about when it comes to Kenny Golladay, it's why you try to reserve a little bit of judgment and say, well, he's the big body. You want to throw him those balls downfield, and you're just not doing a lot of that in preseason at the top with your number ones, Daniel Jones, et cetera. So a lot of questions to answer, a lot of content to cover. Get us here on YouTube, obviously. Get us over on the podcast feed as well. Appreciate everybody, as we always do. We'll be back in tomorrow morning. We'll be breaking it all down. And we'll be talking OGP, man. Until next time, as Andy Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand you the people know. As always, my friends, let's go Big Blue.